We begin with a major development in treatments against the coronavirus.
This morning, the U.S. is one step closer to another pill that could prevent hospitalizations and deaths. Pfizer made the big announcement this morning, saying the clinical trials for its COVID-19 pill are going so well, they're ending the trials early, hoping to get it to the public faster. Pfizer says the pill can reduce chances of hospitalization or death by up to 89%. This news comes as coronavirus cases drop nationwide. Right now, 45,000 people are hospitalized without COVID. That's a significant decrease from the peak of 123,000 hospitalizations back in January. For the latest on this new development, what it could mean for the future of the pandemic, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel. So, doctor, how significant is this Pfizer pill, and help us understand how exactly does it work?
Yeah, Joe, this is significant news, and it's on the actually back of Merck having submitted data to the FDA under review for a similar type of pill. This just tells us that we're going to have multiple options, which we didn't have before, even months ago. So this is a pill that you would take for people who are outside of the hospital within 3 days of mild or moderate symptoms and a diagnosis of COVID. So these are not people who are already sick. They're just mild symptoms, could be a cough, fever, et cetera. Take it several times a day for it looks like it's up to a week to 10 days. Just need to double check that dosing. Bottom line, as you point out, though, 89% risk reduction of hospitalization and death. And this is significant news. I want to put a caveat, though. These were all unvaccinated patients. So this is important, but vaccination still remains the best way to avoid hospitalization and death.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. What's your message to folks out there who see this pill, see that it reduces hospitalizations and deaths, and then think they don't need to get vaccinated against COVID?
Yeah, I say that because 89%, that's amazing. It's an incredible asset that we do need for people who are unvaccinated and get diagnosed. And potentially, Joe, down the line could be useful if we have breakthrough infections that still pose a threat. But again, it is nothing compared to getting a vaccine that prevents you from even potentially getting the infection in the first place or having to deal with these consequences.
Let's talk about this new rule from the White House. It impacts roughly 84 million workers, 2/3 of the country's workforce. Businesses have until January 4th to require workers get the vaccine or face weekly testing. If not, they face steep fines. What kind of impact do you think this is going to have on case numbers, especially since, we're 2 months away from this deadline, which is in the winter?
Yeah, huge impact, because I do feel like people, it's like taxes, Joe. I bet people will wait to the last minute if they haven't been vaccinated. So we'll probably see an incredible bump in vaccinations in late December, early January. But just the fact that this rule is out there is going to prompt many of the employers who haven't put these things into place to start doing the planning. And they already have as of yesterday. And that will respond. Employees will respond. And remember, I think you pointed out that there's an option for weekly testing. Employers are also going to have to think through the logistics on that and the burden of who has to pay for that. All those details need to be worked out. But even working out those details makes any employer think, really, I just want to get my population vaccinated. I'll do anything I can. They'll add into this, Joe, likely more incentives to get people who are unvaccinated to get shots in arms before January 4th.
And finally, Dr. Patel, it's not just COVID. We're now in flu season. We know our best weapons against the flu and COVID are the vaccines. How do you know if you may have the flu versus COVID versus just a cold?
Hard to know if you're at home unless you could have a couple of tools at home. One, some of those home antigen tests that we've been talking about for several months now, they're not 100%. So if you have a negative antigen test, I would still recommend, if you're symptomatic, to come in to a clinic or a pharmacy to get tested with that PCR test. But we also have those same rapid tests for the flu. And Joe, we are using them in clinic. We're using all three. We're using flu, strep. We're also checking for COVID with those rapid tests. So come in and get evaluated, because most of the times it's a common cold if you're vaccinated, but if you're not vaccinated, high likelihood it could be COVID.
Time of year. All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, as always, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
To Washington now, and today could be the day congressional Democrats pass the president's economic agenda. The House plans to vote today on those multi-trillion-dollar bills that together would invest in the country's social safety net and also improve the nation's infrastructure. These potential legislative wins for Democrats are coming on the heels of losses in Virginia and a tight race for governor in New Jersey. The president is hoping to change political tides before the 2022 midterms. Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning. Always great to have you. So last night in the House, the Rules Committee passed through the Build Back Better Act. That's the $1.75 trillion social safety net bill. First, let's listen to a little bit of that.
I appreciate the gentleman wanting to slow the process down, but I can assure him that this has been a slow and painful process that has gotten us to this point.
Not slow enough and not painful enough.
Right. But and I'm sure you will do all you can to, my friends will do all they can to make it more painful before we get to the finish line.
You can count on it.
But I will also assure the gentleman, as he knows, that this cannot become law, and it will not move forward in the Senate without a CBO score.
All right, so while that exchange did get some laughs, I mean, this really has been a drawn-out process for Democrats. How is the White House looking to land this plane finally?
It's been months of negotiations, Savannah, with the president going to Capitol Hill twice to try to rally his own party to get behind his multi-trillion-dollar spending bills. And it finally appears today may be the day that both of those get one step closer to becoming reality. When we talk about the bipartisan infrastructure deal, remember that already passed the Senate back in August. So the House is expected to advance that today, send it to the president's desk for signage, which means it could become law in the next couple of days. That will be a very significant accomplishment for this White House. They're very eager to have that behind them. But then this other piece of legislation, the $1.75 trillion social safety net and climate plan, is a far bigger hurdle to tackle and get through because there are still some outstanding issues as we compete here with the morning landscaping crew, Savannah. But I can tell you the president overnight was engaged, making calls to some of these holdouts, trying to get them to be on the same page. And the fact that there are votes today, something we haven't seen throughout this whole process, is quite significant.
Competing, Monica, and winning. You didn't miss a beat. So now how much of a shot in the arm would it be for the White House if the House is able to pass these bills?
This would be monumental for the Biden presidency. This is something that candidate Joe Biden campaigned on, his Build Back Better agenda. There was so much that he tried to promise and see what could be accomplished. And realistically, with such slim majorities in the House and Senate, the president always talked about this as an uphill battle and really something that he wanted to get done. He was the eternal optimist in all of this when many people said it doesn't look like this is going to be able to come together. He was the one who said, I think I can get my party behind it. But again, the huge question remains for this other multi-trillion-dollar plan. Major senators like Joe Manchin have not signed off on it yet. There are still some big sticking points on immigration, on prescription drug prices, and still on how exactly to pay for it and how that will all get put to bed. So it will come back to the Senate. It will be debated. And now in terms of the timeline, they're looking at Thanksgiving, but realistically, this could slip closer to Christmas when, you know, Savannah, there are already other deadlines to consider, like the debt ceiling and government funding.
Yes, we'll be back to that. Round two on that one coming up soon. Now, Monica, let's put a bend to this also just in context with what's going on. I mean, the president's approval rating has just fallen. Democrats lost in the Virginia governor's race, nearly lost New Jersey's. How could these bills shape the White House's approach to the 2022 midterms?
Last week, behind closed doors, President Biden told House Democrats that this week could essentially determine his entire presidency, what happens in the House and Senate. And I think in large part it wasn't just because of what might happen with his agenda and these bills, but also because of the Virginia and New Jersey races and, of course, those disappointing results for Democrats throughout the country. So there are a lot of lessons that the White House is taking away, though the president argued that even if these things had passed before Tuesday, maybe that wouldn't have made much of a difference. It's hard to know, but he is using those losses to try to boost some of this momentum, which now you're seeing actually result in action on Capitol Hill. So the White House is going to argue this is what voters want. This is what the American people demand. So they're going to want to tout all of this and what they were able to accomplish. And hopefully they believe get over the finish line in the next couple of days as a major, major talking point going into 2022. But the big thing we should remind people is the party in power typically does lose seats during those elections.
All right, Monica Alba from the White House for us. Thank you so much.
Today, a grateful nation will pay its final respects to former Secretary of State Colin Powell in a funeral service at Washington National Cathedral. The retired general broke barriers as the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Powell served in various roles under 4 presidents, both Republicans and Democrats. He died of COVID-related complications last month at the age of 84 while battling a rare blood cancer. You can watch his service at noon right here on NBC News Now.
This morning in a Georgia courtroom, opening arguments will begin in the murder trial of 3 white men accused of killing 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery. Arbery's supporters are already questioning whether justice will be served after only 1 black juror was seated among the 12 selected to decide the case. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen is outside the courthouse with more on this. Ron, good morning.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. This is a case that ignited a storm of protest across the country. And this morning, the family of Ahmaud Arbery finally gets their chance for justice in court. Anger and calls for justice outside a Georgia courthouse after only a single black juror was selected to help decide a racially charged case that ignited protests across the nation. Nearly 2 years ago, family members say 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was jogging through a mostly white neighborhood when he was allegedly chased, shot, and killed by 3 white men. Gregory McMichael, his son Travis, and a neighbor, William Roddy Bryan, faced 9 counts each, including murder, aggravated assault, and attempted kidnapping. They've all pleaded not guilty.
I'm very anxious about the trial beginning. I'm very hopeful that we'll get the correct verdict.
Arbery's mother insists the verdict should be guilty on all charges and life in prison.
When you heard about the jury composition, what did you think?
It was very disturbing to find out that we had 1 African American.
Do you still think you'll get justice, whatever that means to you?
I do think with the evidence that the state has that we will get justice for Ahmaud.
In a county that's about 26% black, with hundreds of potential jurors questioned, the defense used its legal challenges to dismiss all but 1 black juror. The judge stunning the court with this statement.
This court has found that there appears to be intentional discrimination.
But he added Georgia law prevents him from taking action because the attorneys gave reasons other than race for the dismissals, like insisting the prospective jurors could not be impartial.
I think the judge went by the book, and the problem may be the book.
The defendants are expected to argue they were making a citizen's arrest of a suspected robber and acted in self-defense, while prosecutors insist Arbery was an innocent black man murdered.
I anticipate that it's going to be really contentious. In a way, the central facts are not in dispute, and they are caught on videotape. It's really 2 very different worldviews.
The judges told jurors the trial should last 2 to 3 weeks, with Arbery supporters and advocates who say this is a test for racial justice in America watching closely every day. Joe, Savannah.
Great, Ron Allen, thank you so much.
The White House is pushing back this morning on reports that families separated at the border during the Trump administration would be entitled to payouts of several $100,000. Let's listen to what President Joe Biden told a reporter.
So this is a garbage report.
Yeah.
Okay. So
$450,000 per person. Is that what you're saying?
That was separated from a family member at the border under the last administration.
That's not going to happen.
NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now. So, Julia, the president's comments come as negotiations are ongoing between the Justice Department and lawyers for the families that were separated at the border. Do we know why the president is pushing back? Was this just a case of that reported settlement number just being too high?
Well, that's what the White House is saying. We saw Kareem Jean-Pierre yesterday brief reporters at the White House saying that he was just taken aback by the number. But what it seems and what we're hearing from lawyers representing the families is that the president really wasn't briefed on these internal negotiations happening between the Justice Department and those lawyers representing the families. It's important to remember this isn't every immigrant family that's crossed the border. This is a very small section. This is the parents and children of 5,600 who were separated in 2017 and 2018 by a deliberate policy of separation under the Trump administration. And their lawyers believe they're entitled to compensation because of the trauma they went through. Now, when we reported last week, we understood that those figures were still in negotiations and that they're about in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per person mark. The Wall Street Journal reported on that specific $450,000 mark. But it seems that the president was taken by surprise and wanted to push back. Again, it may just be that he didn't understand what was happening internally in this one negotiation. It's not very common for the president to be involved in anything like that, let alone to be briefed on the specific number that could easily change.
So, Julia, let's talk more about the families. What are their lawyers saying about the president's comments, and then what happens next now in the negotiations?
Well, it did have an impact. We understand that on Wednesday evening, shortly after those comments, Joe, that the lawyer to the Justice Department reached back out to the lawyers representing the families and said, look, we're not going to get anywhere near that high of a number. And so now they're really upset. They're thinking that the president basically opened his mouth on something he didn't know about. And as a result, these families are going to have far less compensation than they think they deserve. But the negotiations are ongoing, and they could always go back to court and have a judge weigh in on how much they should be paid.
On top of that, the Washington Post is reporting that at least 25 Republican senators are attempting to block any payments to those separated families. What kind of action are they planning to take?
You know, it's interesting. The amendment that these senators brought up, and this was being led by Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, this is to try to block payments to all immigrant families. So it could, in theory, have an impact on these families. But it seems that they're really using this moment as a political punching bag, saying, look, not only is this administration letting in immigrants, now they're paying them for their trouble. But what we have to remember is this is, again, a very specific set of immigrants who went through a very specific trauma that was deliberate at the hands of the previous administration, taking children away from their parents without any system to track them or reunite them. In fact, over 1,000 still remain separated. But yes, there is an amendment. There's a Republican push in Congress right now to try to block any payments to immigrant families and to try to have an impact on this as well. But of course, this is a court negotiation, and it's not clear that the amendment in Congress would really have an impact on that.
It's a trauma that you and Jacob Soboroff have reported on extensively, and we appreciate your reporting. Julia, thanks so much.
Let's now get a check on your morning news now weather.
Michelle Grossman is in for Marathon Man Bill Cairns. Michelle, good morning.
And Marathon Man in so many ways besides just the marathon on Sunday. But so happy to see you guys. Happy Friday. And once again, we're talking about the cold because it's still here. It's going to be in place tomorrow as well before we see a little bit of a rebound. So here's your freeze warnings, freeze advisories, where you see that hot pink. That's your freeze warning. And 28 million people still impacted by this on this Friday morning. We're going to be below average in so many spots. All that blue on the map indicating some really cool air in place. So Gainesville just 62 degrees today. That's 14 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. And then we're going to kick off the weekend. Lots of soccer games, football games for the kids. And it's going to be a cold one on the sidelines. Temperature is well below normal once again in the southeast. Tallahassee just 64 degrees. We're also watching a rebound. That's good news by Sunday. So speaking of the marathon, looking pretty good on Sunday. But a lot of us back into the low 70s, even upper 70s in Charlotte by Tuesday. Back to you guys.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.